Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Mo, and this is The Missing Piece. Good evening, New Orleans. I'm Trish. This is The Missing Piece. It is Monday, September 5th. It is Labor Day here in the United States. So happy Labor Day to those of you who celebrate that. And I did want to, so tonight, before I get into all of that, we are going to be discussing what I consider, I don't really consider these cursed in a way that most people would, but I do want to talk about some of the most unusual manuscripts throughout history that I have studied myself personally. But before that, again, we are broadcasting live on New Orleans 105.3 FM, United Public Radio Network. We're also broadcasting live on Parapost Network as well now. And I also want to thank Carnation for sponsoring me during my last hour. And I'm happy you are here if you're listening. Let's see. I have to go. I'm still okay. Now I got my comments down. I even made a presentation and everything if it goes the way I want it to, if it works well. Otherwise, I might have to just go to a different screen setting. But yes, I want to get into some of the books I want to talk about tonight are what other people consider cursed or haunted, I guess I should say. And what I mean by I don't necessarily agree with that is some of these, it depends on who's reading it, who's writing it. And I guess, okay, for example, in my belief, um, and as with many pagans or witches or things like that, writing is energy. So if you put something down on paper, then you're putting your energy into that. And throughout history, especially ancient beliefs with the Druids and such, they didn't, uh, most written historical accounts were actually forbidden because one, they didn't want some of that knowledge to be known. You know, it was meant to be passed down through speaking or through um, energy, DNA, intuition, things like that. So that's one reason a lot of these things are, I believe anyways, are in different cipher, different codes, different puzzles, things like that, why people made them that way. Um, and then another reason, so, and you'll see when we get into a lot of these um, with witches or pagans, Wiccas, anything like that, when they create a grimoire, um, many people I know come up with a personalized code. It's kind of like when you're little and you're keeping a diary that you know you don't want your big brother or somebody to snoop through or something like that. Um, that's kind of how I consider it. So they come up with these personalized codes and write the books in this manner. And I believe a lot of these are kind of misinterpreted. There's so many that have been, uh, cryp- scientists and philosophers and professors and all kinds of people throughout history have tried to decipher these. And I honestly believe with many of these, it was written with a personalized um, code, obviously to that author or scribe or whoever was writing it. Um, but I think that's important to consider because sometimes I'm the biggest overthinker there is. So sometimes I think that we absolutely look too much into these things because a lot of these look exactly like a grimoire. And so I want to see if I can share this, and I can obviously see all of the chat room now. So if you have questions, comments, if you've read or come across books that you thought were cursed, things like that, please comment, please discuss it. Feel free, because obviously I had nothing to do on Labor Day. Just kidding, I worked all day, but um no, that's I didn't know how many people would be listening live tonight because um a lot of our other shows were pre-recorded. So let me see if I can share this, because I spent a lot of time making it. If not, I will obviously post it and just go over some of the pictures and stuff. I really want to find a way to share more of these things with you all, because I think it's important I'm a visual learner, and I like to show factual evidence, and uh modern technology is both a blessing and a curse, because I can't always um, share those things with you all. So I'm going to try this. And so one of actually the first that I want to get into amongst the four um, is the well, actually, I'm going to start with this one. Bear with me. I'm pulling up my presentation here. Okay, so back to why I don't believe in curses in the manner that you might think. I mean, I 100% believe in curses, but I believe that curses only you have to give energy to them. Uh, in the same way, in order for them to have power, as with anything, as with words, as with writing, as with communication of any kind, it's my belief that the energy that we feed into any of these things give it more power. So when you talk about even even things like the Bible, just because that's one of the most well known, and no, I'm not saying Bible's cursed, although I mean parts of it might be. I don't know. Um, but even with books like the Bible, think about it. The story of of Jesus on the cross, and just that part of it um, invokes a lot of emotion in people. Even if it wasn't religious based, and you heard the story of, you know, a peasant woman, and then eventually the way this healer, this man grew up and was nailed to a cross. Even without religion being a factor, that would be an emotion evoking story, because it's like when you watch a movie that's a drama or a tragedy, things like that, and it evokes an emotion in you. So something that is very widely known and rewritten, retranslated by literally thousands upon thousands of people throughout time. Every time that happens, every time it is depicted again in a movie, every time the name's mentioned, every time it's read over and over, all of those things are feeding more energy to that story. So it becomes powerful over time, of course, just as negative stories become powerful over time. Like, um, you know, we give more power and energy to historical um, recounts of wars and battles and things like that, or even in the paranormal world. and all on all of these networks. Every time we start researching, we start looking into um, any of these haunted places we go to, any of these, we're feeding into those stories, which can have either a negative or a positive outcome, obviously. Um, Meaning we don't want to feed into it so much that it's recreated and that energy continues to recycle throughout time. Um, that's that's something that we see happening all the time in a lot of these hauntings. Um, but curses, when people think of curses in a religious context or even in the occult, they automatically, or most anyways, I'm not obviously I'm not speaking for everybody, think of demonic entities and things like that, or even back to um, Egyptian scribes many times were thought to have cursed different, like the pyramids and things like that. So that's something to keep in mind is your thoughts became things, your words become things, and your writing becomes things. Although we don't do it much anymore. Most people, if you think about it, all with technology, I know even with kids, my kids anyways, they don't write that much anymore. Even in school, most people text or type or at their jobs or whatever. You use a computer, you use things like that. Most people don't write out like physically handwrite papers anymore. We don't physically write in our journals. There's so many people that have journals that are on their iPads or whatever, their planners. Everything's automated now or kind of done for us. We don't even have to think of our own words to use, our own vocabulary for that matter, because you can use. I talked about this a while back with he was the author Brad Kelly on my show, and I said it's a tragedy because we're letting artificial intelligence literally write our past, future, everything, and doing away with books. And that takes the energy out of it. That takes the human energy out of storytelling because voices are one of the biggest things. Well, obviously even with portals and things like that, it's people's voices that are used many times to open those. The vibration of a person's voice, handwriting, it's the intention behind it, the emotion, the passion. So if I write a poem, for example, um, handwriting and pen, pencil, whatever, ink, but with my hand opposed to typing it on a computer, there's going to be more energy put into that because I'm using, not only am I using another, like if I use a pencil, for example, I'm using wood as an element um, to aid in that, lead, obviously. So here I have a form of metal, and then I have wood, paper, obviously, and the pencil, and then my own energy. So ether, like there's multiple elements going into creating, and if I speak it out loud, that's another one. Um, but when you use a computer, um, yes, I get it. You are still the one behind the keyboard. It is still your energy, your intent. However, it's not it's not the same, you know. So that's one big um distinguishing um thing I wanted to make about books and book writing and authors and things, not between just a correlation between modern times, I guess, and the past. And one of the biggest things I've noticed about historical books, because I love going to libraries and I love going to the sections where they have all of the antique books, because if you notice the detail that went into creating these books, and I'm actually going to I've started learning how to do it, to bind my own books by hand, journals, things like that. Um, and there's so much work and so much detail that went into older books. They didn't have like the mass printed, what do you call those on Amazon? Oh my gosh, where they just have some generic, cover and a few pages and throw the book together. No, they put a lot of work and effort. So there's some older books that have beautiful bindings, hand sewn, made with different parchments and leather and plants and jewels sometimes, anything you can think of. And so I've started creating. I'm an artist as well, and I've started making my own books um, in that manner. A lot. I started that last year actually. Well, no, I take that back. I kind of started that when I was a little girl. So I've really been interested in doing. I've always written. I've always done poetry. Um, I will have some of those coming out in the near future, actually, and you all will probably think, "What? Where does this girl?" And because some aren't all, rainbows and butterflies. I do um, obviously embrace both the dark and the light of life, because um, without rain, there wouldn't be any flowers, right? So. All right, let's get into this. So I'm going to see if I can um, share my presentation here. And so yes, the inspiration, what I've been doing, what inspired me to do the books, I guess, is Hocus Pocus. Um, so my daughter and I were watching the first one a while back, and there's a new one coming out because the this year, this coming year, will mark 330 years since the Salem witch trials. And there's parts, although obviously not all of that movie are based on historical counts, but there are parts of that movie that are based on real people in Salem. And so there's the book, the famous book that's in the Hocus Pocus movie is one of the things that I thought, there's more to these, and that this is why people would consider those cursed. So the first book, and let me see, I've got to stop. I can't have both my camera. Let me see if this will work. Yeah. So the let's see. My first book I want to cover is here we go. It's on the and this isn't, of course it's not going to work for me. So, the first book I want to cover is the Codex Gigas. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably completely butchering that, as a matter of fact. But um so this book it was known as the giant book. It's the largest extant medieval manuscript in the entire world. It is a crazy length of 36 inches. I believe it weighs, um, let's see, it's 36 inches long, 20 inches wide, and 8.7 inches thick. Um, It weighs 165 pounds. Can you imagine? That's like a person. This book weighs as much as a person. And and it's almost as tall as a person would be, I guess. Um, so this book was created in the 13th century in the Benedictine monastery in Bohemia, which is now the modern Czech Republic. So it contains the complete Vulgate Bible, as well as other popular works, all written in Latin. It has the full um, Old and New Testaments, as well as Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews and De Bello Judaico, Isidore of Seville's Encyclopedia Etymologia, and the Chronicle of Cosmas of Prague. There's also two books by Constantine the African. And eventually, it found its way to the Imperial Library of Rudolf II in Prague. The entire collection was taken um, after the war by the Swedes in 1648 during the 30 Years' War, and it's now housed at the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm, where it's on display for the general public. But so this book, though, was made from the vellum of I want to it's like 100 and yeah, the vellum of 160 donkeys. So that kind of reminds me of the Hocus Pocus, the book in Hocus Pocus, where it looks like it has skin stitched together and the eyeball, guarding the book, and the book literally comes to life. That's what this reminds me of. So if you have ever seen the Codex Gigas. Um, it has 310 leaves that are claimed to be made from the skin of the 160 donkeys. Um, Again, this is another element that gives energy to this book, which is why it's very powerful, in my opinion. It also has several colors that are used in some of the illustrations. But there's other really peculiar things about this book. The beginning of the book of Genesis, of course, is missing. It has 310 pages. However, um, it began with 320 pages. 10 pages were cut out and removed at the end of the book. Now, where or when or why that happened, I assume either somebody stole that information probably or didn't want somebody else to find it. Who knows back then? Um, the reason this is so controversial as far as being cursed, because the monk who supposedly, now there is no proof of who actually wrote this, but according to legend, it was one of the monks at the Benedictine monastery, and um, he was being punished. He was being punished. So his name was Herman the Recluse, and he was being said to be punished and killed the next day and trapped in the walls, which is something they did back in the day for whatever reason. Um, that would be a terrible death to be trapped in a wall, by the way, kind of buried alive in the wall. And so, in one last effort to save his own life, he said he could write uh, the knowledge and wisdom of and translate in book form of all the universe. And so they allowed him to do that, but they only gave him the one night. So it said that he made a deal with the devil. He traded his soul to have the assistance of writing this book over seemingly overnight. And so on one of the first few pages is a picture, a really strange picture of what is said illustration of the devil. And so That's what, and that they said that he illustrated that himself, but many people believe that that was his depiction of the devil and to thank him for, obviously, for his help. So um he's clothed, the devil on this page, it's very bright and colorful. He's clothed in a white loincloth, and it has these tiny little dots on it, like small, I don't know, comma shaped red dashes. These have been interpreted as the tails of ermine furs, a common symbol of sovereignty. He has no tail. His body, arms, and legs are of normal human proportions. His hands and feet end with only 4 fingers and toes each, um, terminating in large claws. And both his claws and his horns are red. He has a large dark green head, and his hair forms a skull cap of dense curls. The eyes are small with red pupils. His red tipped ears are large. His mouth is open, and it reveals like he has little white teeth, red tongue, obviously. Um, but all of these things, his tongue looks like a lizard. So it's kind of like the serpents, that had forked tongues, and it's a metaphor of dishonest humans, basically. And so, um, forked tongues, it's it's found in the Bible numerous times with it's an ancient depiction of dishonest people. And so most of the characters are written in yellow on this blackish parchment. Um and it's only these first 3 pages uh that are a different color, that are written in yellow. Um and so many people, it's actually the vellum or the animal hide that's tanned. If any of you know about like taxidermy, um, it becomes that color when it's exposed to ultraviolet light. So I assume with a lot of these books over the centuries, the years since they were discovered, the pages that were exposed mostly to light have developed this darker color. So but he was there was a fire after the 30 Years' War, and the Swedish army basically stole the book as they're looting, um, and it was kept in the Swedish Royal Library. It's There was a fire that broke out in the castle in Stockholm, which destroyed most of the library. The Codex Gigas was thrown out a window, um, according to the vicar Johan Eriksson, and he wrote this 50 years after the fire. It landed on and injured a bystander. So imagine this book, first of all, this 165-pound book being thrown out the window of a castle that's on fire. First of all, 165-pound book comes flying out the window and lands on somebody standing below, right? So that happened back in 1697. So in September 2007, after 359 years, it was returned to Prague on loan from Sweden until January 2008, where it was on display at the Czech National Library. And there was a National Geographic documentary which included interviews with experts who argued that the handwriting was credited to Herman the Recluse, and it indicated that the work was from a single scribe. Now they have also um, done research on how long it would take one person to produce the calligraphy on these pages. Excuse me. And no one knows how if he worked 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, he could possibly have completed it within 5 years. But most say that with the calligraphy and the form of ink and things like that, for that time period, that it would have taken uh, possibly up to 20 or 30 years or a person's entire lifetime. But it is, in fact, the work of a single scribe, meaning one person. Now, the interesting thing about this book, when you see something that should have taken, an entire half a lifetime for a person, typically you would see variations in the prose, a variation in the language, the vocabulary that the author uses throughout different periods of their life. For instance, I know that I wrote differently 20 years ago than I do now, obviously, because I use a different. I'm older. I've learned more. I've matured more. I have a different language, a different vocabulary, things like that. So, but the interesting thing about this book, his the tone he uses and the um, it never changes. It never varies, which would indicate that it was written in a very short period of time. There's also the entire Bibles are rewritten in this manuscript, um, and they're in order actually for the Vulgate version, except for the books of Acts and Revelation, which are the pre-Vulgate version, which is interesting. Those are also in order. Genesis through Ruth, Isaiah, Jeremiah, um, Baruch, Lamentations, Daniel, Hosea, Malachi, Job, Samuel, and Kings, Psalms, Song of Solomon, Wisdom of Jesus, and down the line. They are all in order. Um, then they continue the history of the Jews, and there's such interesting. He has random little illustrations on different parts of this book. For instance, there's a squirrel that is perched on top of different letters on certain pages. A squirrel, which is interesting. Um, and it makes me wonder if certain symbols like that were referenced in the same manner like we use today with different animals being spiritual guides, things like that, having different symbology, um, those things. So, and why he places them on these certain pages is also, um, been a mystery. Now, other pages, the start of Josephus, for instance, he has illustrations of heaven and earth, quite literally planets. Um, so that's another thing to wonder. And I will say, so there are certain things when they say um, that people should not read some of these cursed books. Um, Here's why, and a lot of people ask me this all the time, actually, why I don't watch a lot of TV, why I don't read certain books, why I don't listen to certain music, why I don't, because in my life, those things manifest very, very quickly. So whatever I'm feeding my mind, whether it be through TV or music or the radio or um, in books, There's been times in this matrix, of course, that things happen that make me question, you literally you are what you eat. So what you're feeding your mind is what manifests, what creates your reality, what creates the world around you. And so there's a lot of times I don't want to feed into that. So if it's for historical or educational purposes, things like that, that's a little bit different. Although it's still kind of iffy, I was telling I was talking about this yesterday. I started watching the beginning of um the new movie Prey on Hulu. That's another one of the Alien and Predator movies. And I honestly, even though it was informative to me because it is closely related to a lot of things in real life, I couldn't watch it. It not only did it um scare me and trigger me about things that I've experienced, but it also, I'm like, I don't want this monster to become part of my reality right now. So that's why I don't read a lot of these books through their entirety. um This one I don't understand, aside from, he has a lot of the religious context and things like that, and obviously the devil at the very beginning of the book. But I don't see why people would consider it um so cursed. Um, there's not. It was called the Devil Bible. Now, that is not to be mistaken for they say the Satanic Bible. Two totally different things. Um, but I think it's just because of that full page picture of Satan at the beginning that causes people to assume that it's cursed. Now, why is this relevant? Well, because all of these things are, it automatically made me think of Benedictine College that is in Atchison, where so many people think the entire town is cursed, and that the Pope won't fly over and all of those things. Um, that's where the Sally House, the places like that are, which uh, Atchison is just it does have a lot of history. Um, but I don't think, even there, I don't think that the entire town is cursed by demons like it's assumed. Now, the next one I want to go over is the Voynich manuscript. And this one, I want to be able to show these pages because I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about. And this one's not, so again, nobody knows who the original author is of this book. However, um, Voynich was the man who bought this. Let me see. Wilfred Voynich. He was a Polish Lithuanian book dealer who purchased the book in 1912. Um, it's currently housed since 1969 at Yale University, the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. You can actually read and view this book in PDF format, I believe, online, and I'm pretty sure it's free through Yale University. Um, but this one, the manuscript, it's been studied by so many professional and amateur cryptographers, code breakers from World War One, World War Two, have tried to decipher this for many,
for their different hypotheses and theories and everything else. And um, it's still all speculation, obviously. Um, Now this book is much smaller. It is only, I think, 9.3 by 6.4 inches, but it does have hundreds of vellum pages collected. It's got 18 quires, which I assume are like folios, basically, making the total number of the pages around 240. And but it's got some really peculiar fold out pages as well. Um, and there were that's another thing. So it originally had the 272 pages, but by the time Wilfred Voynich, by the time he acquired it from the book dealer in 1912, many of the pages were already missing. There's strong evidence that the book's bifolios were reordered all, as well, and at various points throughout history. And that would make the page order would have a it would make a meaningful in the original purpose of the book. So, um, radiocarbon dated from the University of Arizona uh, dated this book back to 1404 and 1438. Protein testing revealed that the parchment was made from calf skin and that it had never been used or written on before the manuscript was created. So, um, it doesn't have it has normal wear and tear as far as the holes and everything, but um, they think it was prepared from at least 14 or 15 entire calf skins. That's crazy. This entire book is made from calf or goat skin, which they think is what the binding was made from. Now, those aren't the original book. There were, it was recovered at some point throughout history. And why this book is said to be cursed. Um, it has different sections with some very, very colorful illustrations, and those are herbal folios. So they have 112 folios of herbs, which is kind of like a um, pharmaceutical section, medicinal herbs, things like that. Then he has an astronomical section with 21 folios that covers all of the zodiac signs. Um, Most of the females has 30 female figures, and most of them are at least partially nude or nude. And they have stars attached um, to their arms with cords, which is interesting because that would make you think of almost like soul ties or soul cords. Uh, and those are also in fold out pages. And then there is the Baneological. Um, that's that's an interesting 20 folios in that section, which includes some small nude women with small crowns, and it looks like they're all taking a bath. Like they're just bathing in these pools of liquid. Um, and they're connected by these elaborate, it's like a network of pipes. Um, and that one consists of 78 folios uh, with water. Well, they assume it's water flowing from one folio to the other. So the next one is a cosmological, which is 13 folios. And that has it has roses. Um, it contains maps, diagrams, islands, rosettes, causeways, castles, what you might think of as a volcano in one of them. Um, and then the pharmaceutical part has these objects that resemble apothecary jars. Um, and then the last section is recipes, full pages broken down into short paragraphs marked with stars. So what this looks like to me, and I would assume um, that perhaps if it were monks, or scribes or whoever that were religious, because a lot of times those were the only people that could write back in the day. But here's the thing, as I said, in witchcraft and things like that, witches tend to create grimoires. And I mean, I have one that's been in the making, for a very long time actually, that covers all of the things that we study in that order. So we go through different phases. I mean, they have labels. You can call them whatever you want: green witches, kitchen witches, et cetera, et cetera. So when you learn different skills in life, when you study things, you put your personal, when I'm studying plants and I go on walks in the forest and such, I come back, I draw or paint or however I depict that plant in my grimoire. And I also, any notes I've found on it, any research I've done on it, all of that goes into this book. And so, and then you get to the medicinal benefits of a plant, and the nutritional benefits of that plant, things like that. And I record all of these things based on how what I've learned and how it impacts my life. The same with spell work, which a lot of these books that are cursed, people consider them cursed because there's specific spells that the people wrote. Um, but that's what we do when we find something that we're studying, whether it be an animal, a plant, um, people, astronomy, weather, you name it. You put these in sections of your grimoire and what you learned and how you used it in your life personally. So many of these books are very personal to the person who wrote it, obviously. So I think when all of these researchers and experts and everything else have been studying these and trying to decipher what they mean, I think, now don't get me wrong, there are some highly profound things that um many other or witches and people like that that I know of anyways have found or discovered in life, and it's something that shouldn't be shared with everyone. So, like, meaning, if it got into the wrong hands, it could be dangerous. Or well, good example, Nikola Tesla, um Einstein. Look at the lost, at many of the documents that were found after they died. um Tesla knew, he was 100% not, he aware of the fact that some of his inventions would cause a lot of destruction amongst man. And so a lot of the times that's why there's codes and things in these books. um the Voynich, though, it was, I believe that books come to people, um like Voynich from the bookseller. Obviously, he was meant to have that book. That book was meant to find him. And actually, that it was the inspiration for the show Discovery of Witches. Um, I believe that show is on A&E. And there's this witch who, she's a professor. She doesn't, I'm not going to tell you the whole, obviously, the story and spoil it, but she discovers this ancient book in a library. And so it sounds like this is what happened to Voynich, and that's how I'm not in a library, but through a book dealer, and that's how this book came to him. Um, but still, he wasn't the one that deciphered it, which is interesting to me. Um, it eventually became known also, they began calling it the Roger Bacon cipher manuscript. Um, because there's been so many different translations of the book. Um, it was also purchased later in 1961 by Hans Kraus, who eventually donated it to the library in 1969. But William and Elizabeth Friedman, the cryptologists from World War II, tried to decipher it. Art historian Erwin Panofsky, intelligence specialist, um, all of them, and it just makes me wonder, like, maybe they weren't aware of um, witchcraft or things like that. Maybe they weren't. I don't know. Maybe people still aren't aware that and I guess you wouldn't be um, if you weren't of that belief system, or if it was I guess for myself 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been aware of any of those things either, because I was highly religious and obviously um, only knowledgeable of the Bible at that time. So um, but there's different, they assumed the book was a hoax because nobody could decipher it. um and so it's still to this day examined for clues as to its meaning and origin. And I think it's funny because every time I see this on the History Channel and the Discovery Channel and things like that, they're like, "We don't know what it means. Why does it have herbal and astrology and cosmology and pharmaceutical and cooking and recipes?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Nobody has ever mentioned that this is a grimoire, basically." But it would make sense because if whoever wrote it back in the day, you're talking about the 1400s, possibly even further back, maybe even the 1200s. They're not sure. But during those time periods, obviously, it was very dangerous to be considered um, anything other than Christian. So I can see why many of these scribes would hide things like that. So um, and I'm sure it was also probably forbidden to be drawing depictions of naked women and things like that in books, even though going back to the Greek and Roman history, um, they nudity was pretty common back then. Now, another one is the obviously an obvious one is the Necronomicon. Um, that one's referred to as the Book of the Dead, um, and it is also considered a fictional grimoire. Um, and that was by H.P. Well, this one was originally Arabic, and I cannot pronounce that. Kitab al-Azif, I believe. I'm not. I'm probably completely butchering that. Um, and it's the Necronomicon. Um, was by H.P. Lovecraft. Um, how he got the name isn't clear. However, he did say that the inspiration for the book came to him in a dream, and it's it was influenced primarily by Robert Chambers' collection of short stories, The King in Yellow, which centers on a mysterious and disturbing play in book form. And he didn't actually read that book until 1927. So he he was also a huge fan of Gothic literature and anything related to the dead or dead names, things like that. So um, knower it's also been translated to knower of the laws of the dead, um, book of the names of the dead, things like that. So which is interesting. I will have to post the book that that I made um last year, and it is called The Book of Souls, which is funny coming from a redhead, of course, right? So but I am a medium, so the fictional history of that. um and so the book was originally called the Al Azif, which is translated to the nocturnal sound made by insects, supposed to be the howling of demons. Um, and the reason that resonates at this time of year is because of the locusts, or things like crickets, locusts. That's what I think of automatically, because um, not only are those things written about in the Bible and many other religions as kind of a sign of a plague, but that just reminds me of the sound they make at night. They're very loud, and um, he translated that to those nocturnal insects which presage evil. So that goes back to the legend of, I always say it wrong, Beelzebub, or the Lord of the Flies, or it's also in reference to Psalm 91:5, um, which describes bugs by night or terror by night. And um, also known like the wind whistling, a whistling or weird sound or noise, whistling of the wind. So this Gabriel Usaini defined it as the eerie sound of the jinn, jinn as in the demonic jinn, in the wilderness, and or singing sand, things like that. So if you think about these in modern times, what does that sound like? That sounds almost like what we've been talking about, which I don't mention often. Everybody's been referring to lately. Wendigos or skinwalkers have been known to whistle. And so these are crossing over. This is just basically, to me, sounds like the Arabic version. Um, and so in his history, the person depicted in this book is said to have been a half crazed Arab who worshiped the Lovecraftian entities, Yog Sothoth and Chulu, in the early 700 CE. Um, he visited the ruins of Babylon, the subterranean secrets of Memphis, and the empty quarter of Arabia. And in his last years, he lived in Damascus, where he wrote Al Azif before his sudden and mysterious death in 738, which, according to the Kalakan, happened when he was seized by an invisible monster in broad daylight and devoured horribly before a large number of fright-frozen witnesses. In subsequent years, it gained considerable, though surreptitious, circulation amongst other philosophers of the age, and in 950 CE, it was translated in Greek and given the Necronomicon by Theodorus Philetus. a fictional scholar from Constantinople. Uh, this version impelled certain experimenters to terrible attempts before being suppressed and burnt in 1050 by Patriarch Michael. Um, and so the Elizabethan magician John Dee, 1527 to 1609, translated the book, presumably into English at the time. And but this version was never printed, and only fragments of that book survive. So um, the connection between Dee and the Necronomicon was suggested by Lovecraft's friend Frank Belknap Long, and according to him, Al-Azif had already disappeared by the time the Greek version was banned in 1050. So the there was an account of a secret copy appearing in San Francisco during the 20th century, but it also later perished in a fire. It has not been reported since the burning of a certain Salem man's library in 1692, in apparent reference to the Salem witch trials. And the Diary of Alonzo Typer, the character Alonzo Typer finds a Greek copy, and according to the history of Necronomicon, the very act of studying the text is dangerous, and those who attempt to master its arcane knowledge generally meet terrible ends. Um, and so there's many of um, Lovecraft had many short stories, and so there's very, I think books like this, there's such a cryptic reference to death, and people don't like to discuss death. People don't like to. Here's the thing. Yes, when you start studying these things, it says those who did that meet terrible ends. Um, I think it goes back to the whole different levels, different devils thing. Obviously ignorance is bliss in this world, and the more you are aware, the more dangerous it is, of course. Um, because each level's harder than the previous one. And so I think that's why these books especially um have such a negative but it's also the energy again to what people put into them. So like in hypnosis, assuming trance creates trance, meaning people who don't believe in hypnosis are harder to hypnotize, if that makes sense. So if you think it's going to work, it probably will. And the same with these books and these curses. The more power you give them, the more. If I encountered this book and automatically thought it was cursed ahead of time, then it would be cursed to me. And so the same with if I just came across it and didn't know what it was, it would it be as dangerous to me because I didn't know it, or would it have a different impact on my life? And that's with anything, which is why I don't watch the news in many cases, because I don't, or even why I don't research places I'm intuitively led to, because I don't want to be afraid of them ahead of time. I don't want to. I go to a library and books literally fall off the shelf, or I'm led to a specific book on a shelf, and I start reading it, and then later find out that all these people think it's cursed. Well, maybe they just think it's cursed because of their beliefs, because everyone's perspectives aren't the same. And so now there are things, um, there's additional volumes in the Necronomicon which have been published um, in the United States and in North America, which are is a Necronomicon spell book. Um, and it's got the pathwork for 50 names of Marduk, the dead names, the dark history. And yes, I 100% believe that that could be dangerous and that could be harmful to someone who doesn't know what they're doing with it, because that's like it's almost like some of those could be considered black magic. And when people start evoking spirits and deities and demons and things like that they know nothing about, it's very dangerous, whether you believe in it or not. So that is one area that people, even myself, have learned that these things still exist even if I don't believe in them. You know, it's anything in this world. Um, that's part of the mystery of these books. That's part of the mystery of haunted or cursed objects and things like that, because we can create talismans in anything. It could be a book, an object, a, a necklace, any piece of jewelry, like wedding rings and such are the same thing because they're used in a ceremony in your wedding. And so the same can be done to a house or to a book, to anything like that. So you never know what's guarding that. And yes, some of those things could be a curse. Um, and there's never been, science cannot explain the things that have happened to people who've opened these books or who've opened these tombs in Egypt, or who have opened, there's nothing that can explain the series of events that happen to people. um and that's where these legends come from. And what I've learned, though, with many of these books, they are based on Sumerian mythology. um Obviously, the Sumerians date back to Egyptian times. Um, but many of the great philosophers and things like that, uh, it goes back to their mythology. And I find that really interesting because it's like, were those the original aliens? Um, they also try to prove that these books are entirely fiction. Um, and to me, it's like it's like modern authors, you know. I've said this many times when after I've told different stories of things that have happened in my life. Back in the day, before it was accepted to speak freely, um, I wouldn't have been able to tell those things. I would have had to do the same thing like these people and written a supposedly fiction book, even though it wasn't fiction, even though it was based on my life story. If I didn't want to be burned at the stake or buried in a wall, then I couldn't write about it uh, from a first person stance. So I believe a lot of these stories are actually true, um, throughout history. There's another one that I'm uh, the manuscripts that the King Solomon. And again, this is another one that goes back to Atchison when I was there, because I was led to that book by an entity in the Sally House. Um, and it said that the Seal of Solomon, is what controls demons, obviously. So in that book, that's another one that has really colorful illustrations. Um, and I think what's interesting about that is before I knew about this book, I had a Seal of Solomon, an actual necklace that I had never worn until I went there. Um, the Key of Solomon, if you've ever seen that, I it's interesting. You should look that up. Um, during biblical times, uh, they believe that King Solomon wrote a grimoire detailing the summoning and defense against demons, and that it's used by hunters in modern day. So, again, when I first came across this Seal of Solomon, like this necklace, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know the background. I didn't know the purpose of it. And I find it interesting, not knowing any of that, that I wore it the first time to the Sally house. Um, and I don't think I was affected by um, the demons there as much. But um, the Key of Solomon, the manuscripts, there's one specific one. It's um, identified as a great pinnacle, um, and it basically a sigil that uh, that yeah controls demons. So it was also it was influenced by earlier works of the Jewish Kabbalists and the Arab magicians. So as you can imagine, these things, even nowadays, even to this day, this is still controversial because of the Kabbalah background, the magician part of it, and the Solomon. So you have multiple religious contexts um, to that make up this entire grimoire. But second of all, the fact that this king was writing a grimoire and some of because it's also got a Christian religious context to it as well. Um, so it's like multiple controversial religions here clashing with each other in one book. And that to me is why I don't consider this one to be cursed, but I consider it to be dangerous if in the wrong hands or if someone who is complete like me, I had no idea what any of it meant, and I was still for whatever reason intuitively I had that necklace, which I assume comes from maybe I learned this in a past life or who knows. Um, but I did start studying it after the fact, and I know that I don't know enough about it to be messing with it because it could be really dangerous in the wrong hands. This type of spell work, this type of I've only ever encountered experts in demonology and things like that to to be at this level of what he describes in this grimoire. So that's one of the ones that I see listed on like Etsy and eBay, different pages from it saying how you can uh summon a demon to do this or that or whatever. And I think that's very dangerous. Um can you repeat sorry. Can you repeat the harder to hypnotize thing you just said? I'm sorry. I just saw that comment. Um yes, it's harder to hypnotize people who don't believe that they can be hypnotized. Not meaning they don't believe in hypnosis, because you could 100% believe in hypnosis and its benefits and its effects and things like that without, because a lot of people have this mental block that they themselves are incapable of being hypnotized. So that's what I mean by assuming trance creates trance in hypnosis. And I still can't see, it just says Facebook user. So again, StreamYard's doing the new thing where, if you don't accept, whatever it is, the pop-ups or something, it won't, I can't see who's commenting. Um, so if I'll have to put my entire presentation, the links to these books up so you all can see this, but um, oh, hey. Yes, that's so I think we've talked, I don't know if we've talked about hypnosis before, but um it's one thing that's, most people assume with hypnosis that somebody can completely take over your, your mental state and your mental awareness and make you bark like a dog and do handstands or something on and that's not it at all. With the type of clinical hypnosis um that I do, or that, many professionals do nowadays, it's not, you're 100% fully aware. It's almost like meditating. So you're aware, but then you allow your higher consciousness to take over. And um now regressive hypnosis is a little bit different, because that's more, I don't deal with that right now. It can be, I need a lot more certification for that because it can be traumatizing to people. And so to them it is like they're asleep or something almost. Um but there are other entities that I guess essentially could hypnotize a person and or take over their body. It's like channeling, whether you're aware or not. Many people channel all the time and don't even know they're doing it. Many people have entities channel through them all the time and aren't aware that they're doing that. Um, I talked about this last week or the week before. When people lose time, um, most people automatically assume in this network or this field that it's always attributed to abductions and things like that. And that's not true, because sometimes people lose time because something else had taken over their body. Quite literally, like another entity, another being, a spirit, whatever you ha- you know, whatever it is that takes over their body, they wouldn't remember doing whatever it is they do during that time. So that's it's something that I've studied a lot about as well. Not only studied about, I've also, obviously had it happen to me. So um, that's another thing. Sometimes it's like music and hitting specific notes. And the problem with that is the people that wrote these books, um, sometimes they figured out specific words having the energy to come, and words being put together in a sentence, kind of like a song. Songwriters, when they write a melody or things like that, um, when put together has a unique sound. So a lot of the times that's why they say by merely reading these books, reading certain inscriptions, things like that, can curse you. That's absolutely true because say you're an evil person that wants to, hurt a lot of people, or maybe you're possessed by or have an attachment of one of these demonic entities, things like that. And of course, they would it's almost like propaganda for the spirit world. Like the more they put out there, um, and somebody reads it out loud. That's why I'm not reading any specific. Y'all are probably like, well, what do they say? What do they? Okay, I'm gonna give you the links, and you can go to those websites yourself. But I'm not gonna be the one that specifically reads these things out loud to put that energy out there because one, I don't know what they meant by or what some of them, if they're even translated right correctly. It's like because they were written hundreds of years ago. But second of all, if you were a bad person that had evil intent and you wanted to affect a lot of people, then of course you would put something in writing when read out loud. If the person who read it didn't know what they were saying or reading or doing, spoke it out loud and summoned some ancient demonic entity and then broadcast it over the interwebs, the World Wide Web here, to millions of people. Can you imagine that? Like that would have a terrible effect. So that's something, like don't go reading these out loud to as a bedtime story or something to like your family or anything. But um there's there's so many. I saw something the other day. I had written a poem about this before, and I've referenced Stephen King a lot because, as I said before, he had a close tie to Kansas and Topeka since his brother was at Managers for a while, and he wrote all these books and movies and things. Basically horror stories, a lot of many of them his novels, obviously. And so I saw one time on, I don't know, it was Twitter or something. He had posted about violence and all this and how he was against it. And there was a comment of somebody that said, if you're so against violence and hurting people and things like that, yet you write these fictional stories of death and horror all the time. And I think it's important to recognize, especially with authors and things like that, there's a distinct difference between what we believe in and what we write. Because and I don't mean, I mean as far as like fictional stories, because how do I put this in a way that, um if you have a story made up in your mind, a fictional story, sometimes, especially, I think many authors are empaths as well. Possibly, there's a lot of, could be mediums, whatever. But those stories build up in your mind and your body, and you have to get them out and on paper. Otherwise, they literally poison you, if that makes sense. So so that's why they say it's good to write, because you're getting that energy, that idea, that thought, that whatever. No, who knows where it came? It came probably, possibly, could have come from multiple past lives of trauma and things. I mean, I wasn't always good in a past life, but some of those things are coming back to me now, and there are terrible stories and things that I've done in those lives. And so by writing things down, you get that out of yourself. You get that out of, um, it's a form of healing. Um, just it's like we always we always reference sneezing and things like that in in the spirit world. Like if you ever watch a tarot reader and they sneeze and they'll say, "Oh, that's confirmation." Well, that's one of those things. Sneezing is your body literally getting like rejecting something that dust or allergens or whatever that that are toxic to your system. So, um writing things even from people who are considered a good person, and they might write about bad things. Well, that's why. And so sometimes those things aren't meant to be found or read for that matter. And and I think that's what a lot of these books are, and there's so many of them. And I'm going to post uh my actual presentation that obviously wouldn't play thanks to StreamYard, so you all can see the pictures and the illustrations of all these as well. And tell me what you think about it. Um, I think it would be interesting to hear what kind of books you all think are cursed as well. Um, there's so many more. There's some with really evil intent. But what's interesting to me, because I started doing this a while back, I started making these. I'll have to, maybe I'll do it on like a on a separate, I'll go live separately and show how I made these, like how I actually crafted, put together these books. Um, because it's interesting that these were made, all of the ones that I've referenced tonight were made between the 12 to, well, actually more like 14 to 1600 period. And it's like they went through a period of time where they were all doing this. So where did that come from? That's what's more interesting to me and more profound to me, is that people all over the world were making these grimoires just all of a sudden. And then it didn't happen again for many centuries in between. And then it happens all over again. And that's like the cycles of life in the world and everything else. Yes, I understand that. But this has happened in waves throughout time. You have the Egyptian times and the scribes that put hieroglyphics on the pyramids and things like that. And then you go another 100 years forward, or many hundreds, maybe thousands of years forward, and and then it happens again. Just a few hundred years in there, you have people creating these texts that have supposedly the wisdom and the knowledge of the entire universe, um, as they say, written in these manuscripts. And then it drops off, and a few hundred years later it happens again. So where do these seemingly waves of knowledge come from every few hundred centuries? And it's always correlating to specific years, master numbers. Like I said, this is the 330-year anniversary of the Salem witch trials, and 33 is a master number. The What was it? The Codex Gigas, is it ended um in 1222. Well, 222, 22 is another master number. We're in the year of 2022. All of those things are relevant. Um, so that's what I focus on more than the actual context of the books, is what was giving all of these uh, highly intelligent people this knowledge, this wisdom, in a sequence every so many hundred years, you know. So if you have an idea, theory about anything I've talked about tonight, I've just been babbling on really because my presentation didn't work. So so hello Raymond, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Um yeah, if any of you all have any thoughts on these things, feel free to share, and be sure to like and subscribe to my channel as well. I don't ever market or advertise or any of those things, because it's never, it's that part's not as important to me. I I think of radio and the internet much like I describe to people like being a medium, to the spirit world. It's like, yes, I'm sitting by myself in my house, you know, and I can't see any of you. You can't even see me tonight. But sometimes there could be, over a million live listeners out there, and I don't just because I don't see them does not mean they don't exist, and that you're not there. Um, and I tell people that the internet has given us a good way to explain the unseen around us in our realities as well. Just because you don't see ghosts and because you don't realize they're there in your immediate surroundings and your immediate reality doesn't mean they're not, you know. Because I don't see all of you all does not mean you don't exist. You absolutely do. So, just something to consider. Um, I want to thank everyone for uh, joining me tonight and listening in the future on podcasts. If you have a topic you would like me to cover, please feel free to reach out. The missing piece, PEACE, with Trish at gmail.com is my email. And I will post some pictures of the book that I made as well as the others I referenced tonight on my group page as well as my Facebook page. And otherwise, have a good night, everyone. Thank you.